everyone. Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you've been watching the news lately and feeling this profound sense of unease, you're definitely not alone. The ground is literally shifting beneath our feet right now, and today we're going to explore exactly why that's happening. We are decoding a massive paradigm shift in global security. We're going to break down the collapse of the post-Cold War system and analyze the rise of a new, highly volatile, multipolar world order.
So here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the return of realism. Then, flashpoints and global chaos. Third, the axis of upheaval. Fourth, transactional threats and tech. And we'll wrap up by critiquing the Western response. Let's just dive right in.
Section 1. The Return of Realism.
It is the fundamental question on everyone's mind as we scroll through headlines completely dominated by conflict. Why exactly does the world feel so much more dangerous today than it did 10 or 20 years ago? You know, for a brief, fleeting moment after the Cold War, we kind of had this illusion that great power competition was over, that it was replaced by economic interdependence and shared global rules. But according to analysis from World Geostrategic Insights, that configuration, it was just a historical anomaly. To make sense of this, experts point to a massive return to something called realism in international politics. What's truly fascinating here is how this entirely reframes our understanding of war. In a realist framework, the global system is defined by anarchy. And by anarchy, they mean there's no central global 911 to call if a nation gets attacked. States have to rely completely on self-help just to survive. Because of this dynamic, war isn't viewed as some accidental breakdown of order. Instead, it's actually a structural necessity, a latent, ever-present possibility whenever survival is on the line.
And this sets up a really stark contrast between how we hoped the world worked and reality. On the left, we have the post-Cold War ideal, the rules-based order. This was all about cooperation, economic ties, and moral constraints like just war theory. But on the right, we have the harsh, current reality of multipolar realism. Here, survival dictates absolutely everything. Under this worldview, nations operate on the logic that war is simply a continuation of politics by other means. When economic or moral considerations clash with a nation's perceived survival, the logic of survival wins out every single time. Honestly, this theoretical shift explains a huge amount of the geopolitical aggression we are seeing today.
Moving on to Section 2, Flashpoints and Global Chaos. The data here paints a genuinely grim picture. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, the number of ongoing global conflicts has hit its highest levels since World War II. Traditional norms against non-aggression are rapidly degrading right in front of us. We are witnessing a massive resurgence in interstate violence, everything from border disputes to direct, unprecedented missile exchanges between sovereign nations. The chaos and disorder have leveled up significantly.
And these broad tensions are crystallizing into very specific, immediate flashpoints. Looking at expert predictions for 2026, notice just how many of these carry a high likelihood and high impact rating. We're talking about an intensification of the Russia-Ukraine war, renewed fighting in Gaza and the West Bank, and potential conflicts in Sudan and Venezuela. But look closely, we aren't just talking about foreign conflicts anymore. Experts are actively flagging growing political unrest within the United States as a top-tier global threat. Analysts are deeply skeptical that recent peacemaking efforts are going to hold up, and they're foreseeing highly probable threats to global stability right around the corner.
Which brings us to Section 3, the axis of upheaval. This introduces a pretty chilling concept. As the Kazimir Pulaski Foundation points out, China, aligned with Russia, North Korea, and Iran, has formed an axis of revisionist powers. Revisionist is absolutely the key word here. These nations want to fundamentally rewrite the rules of the global system to disrupt the US-led status quo. Sometimes you'll hear them called the axis of autocracies or the quartet of chaos. But their overarching goal isn't to build a better global order. It's to overturn the one that exists today. And they are moving incredibly fast to formalize this alignment. Just look at this rapid chronological timeline. In 2021, China and Iran signed a 25-year strategic pact. Boom, the next year, right before the invasion of Ukraine, China and Russia declare a no-limits partnership. By 2023, North Korea and Russia are holding summits at a Russian spaceport. And by 2025, Russia and Iran are signing a 20-year defense pact. These aren't just photo ops. These agreements are carefully engineered to bypass Western sanctions and actively challenge U.S. economic and military hegemony.
Let's dig into exactly how they pull that off in Section 4, Transactional Threats and Tech.
The true nature of this axis is fascinating, because unlike NATO, these alliances are not based on shared values. They are purely 100% transactional. China basically acts as the economic engine here, buying up a staggering 90% of Iran's oil exports and roughly 50% of Russia's. Crucially, these massive transactions are mostly done in non-dollar currencies, like the yuan and the ruble. This creates vital economic lifelines for these heavily sanctioned nations. And even more importantly for us, it actively accelerates the de-dollarization of international trade, which has some massive long-term implications for global economics and the value of everyday currencies.
But it goes way beyond oil. This transactional relationship fuels some incredibly dangerous military bartering. We're watching a terrifying web of weapons proliferation directly spurred on by the war in Ukraine. Iran is supplying Russia with Shahed drones. North Korea is literally sending soldiers and millions of artillery shells to Russia. And what do they get in exchange? North Korea receives advanced Russian ICBM tech, intercontinental ballistic missiles, along with fighter jets. Russia is even sharing Iranian drone tech with Pyongyang. Meanwhile, China is supplying critical dual-use industrial inputs to keep the whole Russian war machine humming along. What we are seeing is an unprecedented, permanent state of weapons proliferation flowing rapidly between these four nations.
Now, you might assume this axis is an alliance of equals. Actually, scratch that, it's not even close. China is undeniably the senior partner here, boasting a GDP that's 5.5 times larger than Russia's. On the flip side, Russia is becoming increasingly dependent. Thanks to the catastrophic costs of the war in Ukraine, experts note that Russia is facing a rapidly demodernizing economy. It's essentially being hollowed out, left heavily reliant on imported munitions from North Korea and Iran, and completely dependent on economic life support from China. Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, critiquing the Western response. So, with this highly volatile, multipolar reality staring us in the face, how is the West actually handling it? To answer that, we turn to a really sharp, impartial critique from the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI. They highlight a massive strategic dilemma facing Western powers today, contrasting what we are currently doing with what they argue is actually required. On the left is the current Western strategy of escalation management. RUSI argues this approach treats Russia as too big to fail, relying on extreme risk aversion, constantly shifting red lines, and just drip-feeding military aid. But on the right is the approach RUSI strongly advocates for, defeating the threat. This means fully committing to defending the rules-based order, demanding the unconditional withdrawal of aggressors, and holding them totally accountable, without letting risk aversion trump global security. And this brings us to RUSI's ultimate warning. They argue that weak, accommodating responses have actively catalyzed the Sino-Russian alliance. By prioritizing escalation management, the West is completely failing to deter the axis of upheaval. RUSI warns that constantly refusing to engage directly damages NATO's credibility as a deterrent. Paradoxically, their assessment is that by obsessively avoiding confrontation right now, the West is vastly increasing the risk of a massive global conflict later down the line. In their view, Ukraine isn't just some localized crisis. It is the definitive tipping point for the entire global balance of power. Which leaves us with this haunting, provocative question drawn straight from our analysis today. Is the West actually protecting the rules-based order, or simply managing its collapse? The shift to multipolar realism is already here. The flashpoints are flaring, and the axis of upheaval is actively bartering weapons and oil to rewrite the global rules. How the international community responds in the immediate future isn't just going to decide the fate of single nations. It's going to define the safety, security, and structure of our entire world order. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you next time.